This conference will now be recorded.
There's my only mug.
Man, we got a full crew in here today. So when we start here in just a minute, I'm going to introduce the panel and then let everybody else introduce themselves. And then it'll be a free-for-all after that because I still don't have any structure after that point. If you've got background noise and stuff, it may be a good idea to mute yourself if you're not going to talk for a little bit, if you're just going to hang out, just so we don't get that feedback. But everything sounds great right now. Of course, everybody's muted. So I guess you read my minds. So how's everybody doing?
I'm tired.
Hey,
Oz,
Justin, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, that's funny. I leaned into the mic and went, I'm not muted. I just have a really good microphone. And then nobody could hear it because I was muted.
oh, well, cool. Man, 2 more minutes. I don't know if I can do it. I think I can.
We have faith in you. I mean, I'm required to say that contractually.
Right. Yeah, it's in there somewhere. The devil's in the details.
Hey, Jason, loving the swag, man. Good stuff.
Oh, thank you.
How come you're not sharing it with the Thunder Group? I keep seeing it from was it Mom with a Laser promoting it?
It is actually. She ordered one of her own, or ordered a swag pack, and then said that she wanted to do a giveaway of it. And so when she said she was going to order some to do a giveaway, we just kind of volunteered it and sent her a couple. So we'll actually do that ourselves at some point. It's LightBurn as a company is still myself, one developer, my girlfriend who does physical shipping, and then we have 2 guys who are part-time support. So we're really, really small. Adam just actually joined in. He's the guy. He's probably still muted as well. Oh, no, he's not. Good for him. He's smarter than I am, apparently. But yeah, LightBurn as a company is still very, very small, and the growth has been not linear, but actually kind of a slow sort of exponential curve. And it's accelerating, which is great, but it also means that I have a lot to keep up with. And so doing a lot of the things like promotion and advertising and that kind of thing sort of falls by the wayside. And we focus instead on customer support, development, stuff like that. And so sometimes it looks like, we're not really connecting with the customers in some of the ways that we should be. But I'm trying to
Lasers would be happy to give away any of your stuff.
Okay, well that's good to know. We can send some your way, and I'm happy to do that for Thunder as well as other companies. Like we have relationships with Boss, Thunder Laser, House of Lasers, obviously Thunder, Aeon, and there's a few others. Like we've got a company called Darkly Labs that was one of our earliest resellers. They make a small, not actually that small, but a diode machine. They primarily sell to the education market. But yeah, I don't know. It's been a lot to keep up with. And, we also got hit by Hurricane Isaias last week when it rolled through the East Coast here, and we were without power for a week. So I'm pretty much caught up again. But for a while there, it was just scrambling just to, deal with all the support issues and everything.
No worries. No, things are looking good. I saw your new packaging too. I was pretty impressed.
Cool.
Yeah, the packaging.
But the dragon was a little too small, I think, on it.
What's that? The dragon was too small? Yeah.
Come on now. That's your whole thing. And some of us supporting you from the beginning, like myself. I got the honor of getting the free days you gave out for the beginner supporters.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right, cool. Looks like we got about everybody, and I actually waited. So I'm Brian with Thunder Laser, and this is our weekly webinar. We've got Chris with us, who's also with Thunder Support. Say hi, Chris.
Howdy.
And we've got special guests tonight, Jason and Adam with LightBurn. And if Jason, if you'll just briefly introduce yourself, then we'll go to Adam.
Jason Reif, you might want to mute when you're doing that.
Oh.
Hi, my name is Jason Dorie. I am the creator and owner of LightBurn software. It's been kind of a bizarre ride. I also just woke up from a really long nap, so I might take a moment to sort of catch up.
Well, I'm glad you're with us. Adam, what's up, man?
Not much. Yeah, I'm Adam Haile. I work for Jason, which was also a weird ride. I used to work for Red Hat, and I've been a software developer for a long time. Met Jason at Bay Area Maker Faire, and quickly sort of got pulled into the LightBurn fury.
Cool, cool. And we also have the legendary Marc Stippo with us. What's going on, Marc?
How you guys doing tonight?
Doing well. Now, Marc comes from an epilogue and CorelDRAW background mostly, but he is a master at preparing images and, more importantly, doing tutorials on how to show people how to do it. And we're going to get him a little more familiar with Chinese lasers and Ruida and let him work some magic for us, hopefully.
That sounds good.
So, Marc, just a quick blurb about yourself.
Well, my full-time career is I'm a manufacturing engineer for a large job shop, and I do laser engraving on the side. And when I was, I kind of developed the process of putting images on pretty much anything, wood, glass, canvas, and so forth. And there was a big calling for it. People were, how do you do that? How do you do that? And it was so overwhelming that I actually, with Brian's help, I formed the Institute, the Laser Engraving Institute, and I would do, webinars like this one to teach people how I did it, how I came up with the way I did it. And it's, I've done, classes one-on-one with people all over the world, South America, South Africa, Australia. I've done, the computer, this kind of platform that we're talking about right now is fantastic. So I really got a chance to meet some interesting people and connect, through laser engraving, and it's a really great platform.
Cool. Well, we'll look forward to that. We've also got Jason with Rotoboss with us tonight. He's the usual. Hey, man. And don't forget Awesome and Marc and Robert. And actually, most of you guys look like you've been around a few times. So welcome, everyone. Kevin, I see you made it. And Grant is our sales manager. He's popping in too. So I don't know if you guys want to go through the full introductions for everyone, but if you want to, be my guest. I don't know how that would even work. Chris, you handle that part.
You can't
He's
talk
muted.
and walk at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So this is kind of a free-for-all. Kevin, I think I was talking to on the phone today. He's rather new. I see Adam on here. There's a few people. So I guess I'll let the newcomers have the floor if they have any questions or comments or anything like that.
Hey, I'm Kevin Peavy. I was speaking with Brian earlier, and he answered a lot of my super technical questions that I had. And I'm over here in the Northern Virginia area. I live actually across the border in West Virginia, where it's cheaper. But my wife and I we have a small business, just started up pre-COVID, and our products were primarily women's accessories that we imported from Colombia, South America, where my wife is from. And due to COVID, a lot of our art and our products that were handmade and made out of organic materials are kind of at a standstill right now. So to broaden our inventory and not rely on a supply chain, we wanted to become the supply chain and be able to make things ourselves. One of the primary questions that I had was about the and Brian answered a lot of it earlier. I'm looking at going with the Nova 35. And what I was curious with the LightBurn software is about variable 3D engraving. I've read a lot about the other companies that have like 8-bit resolution. I wasn't sure what that meant, and Brian told me about it. But I just wanted to kind of see the ease of use with doing 3D engraving with LightBurn, and what kind of resolution you should expect, and speeds and that kind of thing. That way we can kind of look at what our options are going to be for wattage and pricing and everything to work it into our budget.
Mm-hmm. Take it away, LightBurn.
Oh, great. So first of all, I'm going to preface this by saying that Brian, as well as some of the people from Thunder Laser proper in China, have likely done more testing with this stuff than I have. That said, LightBurn does internally support doing what we would call 3D height map engraving. If you go to Google and you do a search for grayscale height map, I think that is the correct term. There are some variations on that term, but effectively what you're looking for is an image that uses the gray value of the image to dictate the height of the engraving that you're doing. In RDWorks, there's a switch called direct output. You enable that switch, and it will vary the output of the laser by the value in the image. Okay, so that's the most direct possible description of what it is that it's doing. It uses the brightness value in the image to control how powerful the laser is on output. You choose what your minimum and maximum power values are, and then in between that is how the grayscale affects the output of the laser. So it will vary the power from min power to max power depending on what the gray value of the image is at a given point. For diode lasers, that actually gives you variable darkness. So black basically is the highest power output, and white is the lowest power output in between your min and max. And with a diode laser, because they're relatively low wattage, it produces a variable level of burn. With a CO2 laser, it produces a variable level of depth because you're effectively vaporizing material. It doesn't even have much of a chance to char until you start going deeper and deeper and the heat builds up. So that's all the technical crap. What you actually end up with is a variable depth of cut. And so you can produce a horizontal gradient, for example, to give you a linear ramp. You can take like a radial gradient, and that'll give you a cone shape, and so on. And then the power level and the number of passes that you use to go over the material affect how deep the final burn ends up being. And other than that, there's really not that much to it aside from prep and cleaning.
Okay, now how many passes are on typical? I mean, because I'm looking at maybe doing embossing or leather, or seeing how it would engrave from I was looking at the 80-watt CO2 laser, and I didn't know if I'm at more of a risk with that high of a wattage.
Higher wattage makes it harder to control the low end of the power. So the higher wattage of the tube, there's CO2 lasers have what's called an ionization threshold, and that is the point at which you hit enough power to actually start firing the tube. So when you're using the laser normally, if you have min power set too low, it won't even fire the beam. You get no output. And with the ballpark number that I use with people is 10% of whatever your tube wattage is. So if you have a 50-watt tube, it takes about 5% power before that tube even fires. If you have a 100-watt tube, it takes about 10% power before that tube fires. If you have a 150-watt tube,
I think you mean 10 watts and 5 watts.
No, it's actually 10% of the PWM.
Oh, of the percent.
Oh,
gotcha.
okay.
Yeah. So it's not linear. It's not, you get a 5-watt output. It's actually higher. when you have a larger physical tube. It takes more power being pushed into the tube before it kicks. And they have the ionization threshold point. There's actually a fall off after it. Once you get the tube ionizing, it doesn't take as much energy to keep it going as it does to get it going. And so Ruida controllers have a mode switch in the vendor settings called special mode or common mode. Common mode is the default. Special mode actually does give you a stronger initial kick and then drops the power off. So you can use it for slightly more subtle engraving than you can normally. But it comes at a cost. It will actually degrade the tube faster. Because it's stressing the tube by doing that. When you're riding that line that's right on the edge of the ionization threshold, it's harder on the tube than if you are going kind of mid-range to like the 80% mark or 70% mark that everybody recommends. If you go above that, you're stressing the tube as well. So you kind of want to be within that range.
That's cool. You know, something about that. Have you seen what I posted about the banding? On those 100-watt ones, I think that's exactly what you're describing is that fall off right after it. That's why we have to get up to 30% or 29% to be able to get past
to keep it stable effectively. If you're running lower than that, it fluctuates a little more than when you're at that or above that ionization threshold. And I'm
Jason,
not
what. He did mention speed, so it's probably a good idea to mention that.
Yeah.
Grayscale engraving or 3D engraving is not going to be fast whatsoever.
It's not.
Okay.
You can vary it a bit by adjusting your DPI or what we call interval. So interval is how closely spaced the lines are. When you use a narrower interval or a higher DPI value, you are taking smaller steps, and so you're putting more power down per kind of square inch of material. And so you'll get a deeper engraving as a result, but you'll also get more overlap in the dots, and it can affect the shading. And like when you're using grayscale, it's more of a problem when you are using dithering, that's more of a problem than when you're using grayscale. Grayscale. But yeah, I've done a couple of tests. Brian has done a few tests with grayscale engraving, and it takes usually 2 to 3 passes to get a really decent depth. Like if you wanted to get a 1/4 of an inch of depth in a piece of hardwood, for example, you'd probably have to do 2 or 3 passes at fairly high power, and you don't want to go really fast, otherwise you don't get much depth. And then on top of that, you mentioned leather. Leather is going to be a pain to clean because it produces a lot of smoke. It produces a lot of ash or soot. And you want to be able to clean it afterwards. And because leather is soft and it's got grain and texture and that kind of thing, you'll end up kind of brushing stuff into that grain. The 3D tests that I've done have worked better with harder woods. So stuff like maple, things with really, really fine grain that are thicker. Pine is really easy to burn, but because of the variation in the density of the grain, you actually get like weird waves and ripples in your engraving. Whereas if you're using something with a really, really fine grain and very, very little grain, you get much more consistent engraving. MDF actually works relatively well for 3D engraving, but the glue in it is really hard on the laser and it gets all over everything. And you get a lot of dust in the machine. So
doing a test on a 2x4 is the only time I've had to get out my fire extinguisher. So, yeah, don't do pine.
Yeah, well, pine is relatively wet as wood too. Like you get a lot of sap.
Yeah, it depends on what you had. I had like a really dry, like old 2x4. I was just testing something real quick, and it just caught on fire.
Yeah.
So primarily for leather, we should be looking at just cutting it and then embossing it and
cutting and like engraving does work. So you can do surface marking. I've done phone cases that have a leather coating on them or like a glued leather layer over wood. They work really well, and leather holds detail well, and it looks good, smells like hell.
Right.
Like leather is skin. So when you're
Right.
burning it, it smells like burnt skin.
Right.
And it's the only thing that I've ever found that smells worse than felt. And felt is burnt hair.
Yeah,
Oh,
felt
man.
smells terrible.
Felt
I have
is
seen people.
disgusting.
It is. I have seen people put like a masking over leather, and I've tried it
Mhm.
before. It works relatively well because then you can kind of clean that off, and you don't mess up the rest of the surface that wasn't burnt.
Yeah.
But it just depends on the type of leather.
Yeah, leather, the other thing that I found with it is that it curls when you burn it. And so you would have to weight it or pin it or hold it down in some way that you normally wouldn't have to do with woods or hard materials. So it's worth trying to see if it will hold the depth and the variation with an engraving. But you'll have issues with curl, definitely, if you're not holding it down. I've just taken loose leather samples, like a cap patch, for example, and set it on the laser and had the edges lift as I was getting close to them, because you're removing material and you're burning the stuff underneath it, and the removed material kind of has a tendency to sort of pull the leather towards you. I don't know if you've ever done welding, but steel works the same way when you're welding. Like it will pull as it contracts. Leather behaves like that.
Does anybody have any experience with vegan leather or pineapple leather? I don't know if you've heard of this stuff. It's a kind of a new thing.
What I've been told, and I don't have personal experience with it, is that the veg tanned leather stuff, they use, I want to say, chromium in the treatment of it. And it's highly toxic, so be careful with it.
Okay.
Other than that, like just like anything, if you've never lasered it before, look up MSDS specs for the stuff and find out, is it toxic? Is it flammable? Does it contain chlorine? Things like that. Chlorine, when you burn it, releases hydrochloric acid. Really, really bad for the laser. Really, really bad for you and your lungs.
Yeah.
That's why everybody tells you don't burn vinyl. But I want to say that some may contain vinyl and may contain chromium or chloride in the treatment that they use. So double check.
Okay. And for working with leather, is 80 watts overkill?
I wouldn't say it's overkill. No, 80 watts is actually a nice trade-off between power and speed. Yeah, the tube for an 80 watt machine is still relatively small. And so the firing threshold is not as bad as it is with a 100 watt or a higher tube. Okay. You're on the border. Like 40 watt gives you really, really good low power control and not a lot of cutting depth. 60 watt is a really nice kind of middle ground. And the Thunder lasers have good quality tubes. They've got a really narrow focus point compared to a cheaper Chinese import. 80 watts, you're just one step outside of that range. So it's still a decent middle ground, but you've got a little more power if you're doing cutting. 100 watt or higher is hard to control, or harder to control when you're doing fine engraving work. So if you're doing photos or dithered stuff, you've got a larger beam spot, and it's harder to get that good shading. 80, you're just starting to get out of that range. 60, I would say, is kind of the sweet spot, but 80 is not as bad as going higher.
Okay. Thank you for that. Because of the little detail that we want to put in on our products, I didn't want to, try to dial it in and then I'm just shooting holes through everything. So.
Yeah. That ionization threshold can be a pain. Because you can't fire the tube below like 10% of the wattage, and that's a total ballpark, and it varies based on power, tuning, everything else. But yeah, you end up having to compensate by going faster, and that can help. But there are times where you want to go slow. You kind of want to dwell a little bit, so you get a darker burn, or you get a little more depth, or whatever. But in doing so, if you can't fire the laser low, like if you have to go above that certain power threshold to get the thing to fire at all, then you're just burning the hell out of whatever whatever material you have. So yeah, we have people sometimes who are like, so I'm trying to do photo engraving and I have a 150 watt laser, and you're just like, oh,
yeah,
child, you are going to have a tough time. So,
Yeah, I used to have a 120 watt, and when I replaced that machine, I got the Nova 35 with the 80 watt, and it was definitely a good choice because
Okay.
I can still blow through cuts real quick, but I can engrave if I need to.
And you're always welcome to send us whatever you want. So if you have materials that you want to see the results, I've had people send me patches of leather and they want detailed engraving on it. I have a 100 watt and I've got no issues controlling the lower end. I mean, I've had other machines before, and the Thunder Laser actually does a really good job because of the higher quality parts, controlling at the lower end of the spectrum. But happy to do samples for you and send them back out, and you can see if it'll work for you.
That's good to know. Thank you.
yeah, the lens makes a difference as well. I think correct me if I'm wrong, Brian and Chris, but I think the Thunder Laser has a 1.5 inch lens focal length by default.
Two.
Is it 2? Okay. I had a 100 watt before, and I'm pretty sure that one was also a 50.8, and I've got a 60 watt Thunder Laser now. And the size of beam spot that I get and the firing threshold is much, much smaller on the 60 watt machine. However, I'm able to cut the same thickness of material at the same speeds as I was with my 100 watt machine, because the 100 watt machine had a fatter beam spot. You don't get as much power focused in a tight space, and that actually does affect your cutting power. And your air assist matters. I've hooked up a proper shop vac to mine instead of just using the aquarium pump. And because the Thunder's head is quite close to the material, it's got the way that they set the lens in the head is a little bit higher up than the machine that I had before. So the nozzle itself is actually really close to the surface of the material you're cutting, which means that air that's coming out of the tube is being injected directly into the cut instead of just kind of blowing over the surface of it. And that helps when cutting, and it helps a lot. Like I was genuinely surprised. I'd had people tell me, use a proper compressor, it makes all the difference. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But it really does. It makes a massive, massive difference.
Oh, that's a cool drawing right there. I see the grayscale.
Yeah, that looks like a spire. Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, another thing you might want to look for if you're trying to find images like that is it's called a bas relief. It's BAS relief, all one word. Is technically what that's called.
I got my 2-year-old coming.
Come here.
Yeah, also searching for CNC grayscale or STL files grayscale will also help you find ones just like that.
Okay. I see what you're talking about, the bas relief.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah, you'd need to go bas relief grayscale probably to get the kind of photo that you want. But yeah.
Sorry, I got booted off. This is Marc Stippo. I got booted off for some reason. Why, you don't like me?
It did say that Brian was having technical difficulty, so maybe that was why.
This is actually a spire, but this is actually a 3D image. Can you still see it?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is actually a 3D image of just a plant that I pulled up, and just I want to make one thing clear. I've been laser engraving for a few years now, and there's nothing easy about engraving 3D. It is really a lot of it is kind of black magic. It's trial and error, a lot of trial and a lot of error. But when you get it, the results are fantastic.
Okay.
But it all revolves around the detail of your grayscale. Because as Jason was saying, it goes from light to dark. That's all laser really knows. Is light and dark and how to put power to those pixels. And you want that detail as much as possible so the laser can figure out what to burn light and what to burn deep, and power and wattage make a big part of that. But yeah, I've done 3D laser engraving, and it is nothing is easy about it.
Okay, that's good to know. Give me high hopes. Love it.
Yeah, well, don't. I'm just trying to say, don't
No,
be
no,
discouraged.
I'm looking
Yeah,
forward
it's good
to
to
trying
know.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. I
It,
Don't be
it's
discouraged. And talk to Brian. I can actually help create an image for you, just for you to try out. You can import it into LightBurn, and I'm sure LightBurn can transfer the image. I guess, Jason, what would it be what would be the best file?
PNG is the file format that I tend to use the
okay.
most for images. So PNG is lossless,
Hmm.
which means that you don't lose any detail, and it's also relatively flexible and allows for transparent channels easily. And LightBurn will preserve transparency. So if you negate the image, for example, and this is more useful if you're engraving on stuff like granite or slate or things like that, and you actually need to bring an image in and flip it so that you can go, instead of engraving dark on a light material, you're engraving light on a dark material. If you have a transparent area, so in the image that Marc is showing here, you wouldn't want to engrave the area around this design. You would just want
Right.
to engrave the design itself.
Yep.
Um, Most likely. But for some things, if you have an image that is just black and white everywhere and you do a negate, then it will negate, it'll take that nice white background that wouldn't normally be engraved and make it black, and now it's going to burn the hell out of that too. And so having said,
That's what you would want right there.
Right.
yeah, you want it clean. So PNG is a nice format for that. JPEG will store a little smaller, but ultimately, once it's in the software, it's all just brightness values and pixels, and it really doesn't matter that
Right.
much. If you've got a good quality, relatively high DPI picture, you should get a decent result.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with this. We're working with Illustrator, Photoshop, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When keeping your transparency and no white. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah. The one other thing that I would add to what Marc said is I've actually found photo engraving can be harder than 3D engraving.
Yeah.
I've gotten decent results, and not spectacular, but decent, by pretty much just downloading a grayscale image file that I found, setting min and max power and hitting go. And that's almost never going to get you a decent result with a photo. So like I said, it wasn't spectacular. It was passable, and it wasn't amazing. But some people with photo engraving will do that. Just download a picture, throw it at the software, hit go. Use the defaults, and end up with something that looks kind of like a black square. Whereas with a 3D engraving, you tend to actually get something usable out of it. So I would say 3D is probably just a little easier than photo engraving. Photo engraving, to me, it seems to be the harder one.
Okay.
I don't know if Marc's going to agree with that or not, but
Has Brian ever showed you the photo engraving that I've done in the past?
I've seen some of your work before. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I took it took me about 2 years to come up with taking a little information from this website and a little information from this YouTube video, and kind of compiling all mine together. I'm trying to find my photos that I have to share. And once I got it, it really it blew me away.
Cool.
It was really stunning, and the amount of detail you can get, in specific, media, woods. The hardwoods are the best ones to work with. Birch, walnut, believe it or not, is really nice to work with.
Okay.
Pine, stay away from pine. Trying to get a good image on pine is like, forget it. It's because it's very wet, it's very gooey.
Yeah.
I gotta find my. You guys talk amongst. You guys keep doing the meeting, and I'll see if I can find some pictures that I've done in the past.
Yes, about the marble.
I had a quick question to elaborate on detail. Is it worth buying I bought a Nova 51 100-watt, which I'm still waiting on. But is it worth me just to buy the HDR head now? Will I achieve better results all the way around by having the multiple heads to go on there?
I don't have experience with that. I know that a shorter focal point laser will give you a smaller spot, and so you should theoretically be able to get finer detail. With a higher wattage laser, you're going to have a harder time getting darkness. Like getting the contrast that you want is probably going to be a little trickier, because you'll have to go faster. If you're burning onto things like granite or slate, I would say absolutely the higher detail head would help you, because granite or slate doesn't shade. Like it's really all completely 100% about the size of the dot for materials like that. Whereas wood, when you hit wood with heat, it tends to bloom. And so the longer you sit in one place, the wider that bloom gets, because it's burning slowly, almost like a spreading spot. Whereas anodized aluminum, slate, anything that's like a white surface painted black or a black surface painted white, that kind of thing, you don't have that blooming effect. You're just removing material. It's like, scraping something off. So the smaller dot you get, the better quality result you're going to get. So it's going to depend some on the material you have.
And what your focus is. If you're going to be doing a lot of photo engraving, then absolutely you're going to want something that you can bump that DPI up and get more detail out of. If you're not going to do a lot of photo engraving, the HD head is probably going to be useless for you, or very, very fine cutting, maybe thin materials.
Yeah, I've actually seen people like I want to say Anthony has found that when cutting thin material using the really, really shallow focus lens, the really, really fine beam spot lens, gets him faster cutting, but it falls off quickly as the material gets thicker, because you have a dot, like your beam is no longer like this, it's more like this. So you've got a really shallow focal range, but if you're within that focal range, you can get a really fast cut. If as soon as you start cutting deeper, you lose that, and so you want a deeper throw lens. So it's like everything else, it's your mileage may vary. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually used
completely flat too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used Anthony's Beam Buddy lens to do, like, what was it, 1 mil thick PETG at like 80 millisecond, I think, because it was, such a smaller spot and so thin it didn't matter. But yeah, above that, not so much.
Yeah, and that really high res head, the Beam Buddy head is what we're talking about here. I want to say the focal length on that is like 3 millimeters, 2 millimeters, something silly like that. It's really thin. It's like you're effectively, it's like the thickness of a quarter.
Yeah.
So if your material has any warp in it at all, it's going to cause you problems. And so for that, you're going to want a larger focal length lens. So it's a hard question to answer, because it really depends on the material you're going to use, the quality of that material. Is it warped? Is it flat? Is it ground and polished? Or is it natural and variable? All that kind of stuff. And the closer the head is to the material, if you're working with natural materials like leather or pine or anything like that produces a lot of soot or smoke, that's going to get on the lens. The closer the lens is to that material, you're going to have smoke ejecting and hitting it. And if you're really, really close, it gums up the lens and it'll eventually close off your spot. You got to clean more often, stuff like that. So it's hard to give you a correct answer.
So I had another question. Thank you for answering all my questions already. My plan, okay, my office, I got a pretty sweet computer set up. I got kind of nerdy with it. I have all the processing power I need. The printer is going to be massive. It's going to go in the garage, which is on another level. I talking with Brian earlier. One of the biggest drawbacks I'm seeing right now is that I'm going to have to be local to be able to use the camera to be able to view it on the LightBurn software. Is there any way around that?
There is.
Do it wirelessly from my basement.
It's possible to use an IP type camera. they tend to have lower resolution. So IP cameras tend to max out at HD, meaning 1920 by 1080. That's kind of the highest you'll find for an IP-based camera. Most of them tend to be even lower than that, and they'll be 1280 by 720 or something like that. If you have a larger machine bed, that lower resolution translates into lower positioning accuracy and lower camera accuracy. LightBurn internally does not directly support IP cameras, but there are free software applications that you can install that will present an IP camera stream as though it is a USB camera, and then LightBurn can connect to that and display the camera image that way. And so there are people who do it.
It might just be easier to design it on my computer and then bring the laptop up.
Yeah, I was going to say the issue that I have with any of that is, number one, we try really, really hard to discourage any sort of remote operation at all. We never want people running the laser, in the garage while they're sitting in the comfort of their warm home, for example. It's a very attractive thing to be able to sit in your house while the laser's in the garage and it's colder, or it's hot in the summertime, depending on where you are. Fires happen. They just do. And if you are standing there and something flares up, it's really easy to just reach in with your thumb and it's, that's the end of it, and you don't have a problem. But if you are remote viewing and you have to run from whatever room of your house you're in, downstairs into the garage, it doesn't take fire long to get out of hand. I've had 2 fires in the entire time that I've been working with lasers. So I've been relatively fortunate, and they've both been very small, little squirt bottle next to the laser and that's it. But I also have a CO2 fire extinguisher next to every laser that I have. And, if anything bad happens, you're sitting there. But I've seen lots of, post garage fire pictures, that kind of thing, and like plenty of them to tell me, hey, never do this. So that out of the way, yes, it's possible. You can use it. What's that?
I'm not going to do it. Nope.
No. I mean, yes, it's possible to remotely, or to use the camera over a longer distance. That far, what you're talking about, in a separate structure is harder. You can get active extension USB cables. They're effectively a signal repeater that include an amplifier, and those will work over longer distances. USB itself is only valid for 16 feet, 5 meters. Past that, you need to repeat the signal, like rebroadcast it. And so an active amplifying USB cable is basically a USB hub with one port. And so it just replicates the signal and resends. So you can use those, or you can use, USB over IP, something like that. Those things do exist. They vary in quality and that kind of thing. But the biggest trouble that I've found with using the camera that way is that you often want to make adjustments or small tweaks, place something, take a capture with the camera, line up your graphic, do a quick test to see, is the laser firing in the right spot? Do I have it lined up? Did I forget to do something? If you forgot to bring the focus point up to the right spot, you might be firing in the wrong place. And if you're working with material that you only have one shot with, so for example, if you were doing a headstone and it was a big slab of granite that somebody brought you and you're not going to get another one, you want to make sure you get it right the first time. If you have to do any last minute adjustment or anything like that, you need to kind of go back and forth between your computer and the laser, and having it in another room is a pain. So a laptop is a better choice.
I'm actually in the same boat with my laser. I'm just running an old desktop that I had, but fortunately LightBurn is pretty speedy on most things. I mean, you want something a little bit new, but nothing too crazy. But I had one of the things that's been the best for my workflow with that is now I have like a network attached storage device, but you could also do this if you just do a network share of the drive on the main computer that you're running. And then when I go downstairs, I've saved the file to that. I can immediately open it up. I also share my material library on the same storage device. So I have it on either machine. And that way I can just do most of the design inside and then go out to the garage and open it up. And that's really all I ever need.
Even something as simple as
Dropbox works well for that too.
Yeah. Work with an independent hard drive. That way it's shared throughout the network.
Sorry, say again?
if you have like for me, I have 3 different computers. I have one central network hard drive that
Yeah.
everything's to, so no matter where I go, I can get that same
Yep.
updated file or whatever I need right off of each computer. I don't know if
I,
that's what
Or
you.
you could.
Yeah,
That's
that's what I was talking about. I just know that not everyone's
yeah,
like us nerds and has a NAS in their
yeah.
house.
Yeah, we recommend 2 different approaches. One of them is a NAS drive, like what Brian is saying, or what Jason is saying, where you have a centralized network store. The one issue that I have with that is that the performance of those network drives, when you're doing large file work, LightBurn will save a backup of your file, for example. And so if you are working with a file that's sitting on a network store, LightBurn will save the backup in that same location, and writing to those takes a while because it's over a network and that you've got ping time and lag and so on. Whereas when you're working on a desktop computer with SSD drives, everything is essentially instant. Yeah. Yeah. So the approach that I recommend is using Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, something like that will do a replicate instead of just storing on the network. So you're saving everything locally. You've got everything on a local machine, but the network storage software is sending it remote. And then when you boot up the other computer, it syncs those things so that they are now local. And the kinds of changes that you're making with like LightBurn files, they're not going to be that large. They don't take any real time to synchronize. So that works out pretty well.
Oh, thanks for the shout out. That's
Nice.
I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
you
was
guys.
about to say we don't represent Google or anything like that, you know.
Uh,
Use Dropbox or anything.
yeah.
I worked for Apple for 3 years, so there's going to be a Rumble later if anybody's.
I mean, you guys have heard of Google? That's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple times.
Yeah. Yeah,
I still use Alta Vista for searching.
Ask Jeeves.
So is there anybody else maybe that joined us a little late or something that might have some questions too? I don't want to leave anybody
Yeah,
out
I
if
don't wanna
anybody
take
else.
over.
No, you're good, man.
After all the QA, Kevin must be buying a 51 now at this point.
Do you work for Thunder Laser?
Negative, man. I'm the old boy here. Other than some of the other guys are not here, so I get to be the oldest one. I've had
Once you drink the Thunder Aid, you don't want anything else.
All right.
Now I'll tell the new users or people who are looking for it. I have Nova 2460 since 2016. It's been 4 years. That beast is still running solid. But I am jealous of the new ones they're making because it's got some fancy options that I don't have. And I keep bugging Brian, man, what you gonna do for this old guy right here? I need to do some upgrades on mine. But he always teases me the other way around. It's cheaper to buy a new one.
Well, then you have 2. Or
Yeah,
however many you have.
Out of the house at this rate, since my laser's sitting in the living room.
Yeah, I have mine like so.
Hey,
this is my. What's that? Go ahead.
This is Gary Wine. Jason, I thought I saw somewhere on one of the forums you were saying about being able to do a frame that is not a rectangular or square frame. It can frame odd object.
Yep.
Can you explain how that's set up?
Yeah, you have, if you look in LightBurn at hang on here, I'm going to not minimize you guys, but bring up LightBurn on my screen just so that I can show you.
We know what you mean.
What's that? Yeah.
We know what you mean.
I don't know that they do. I have to make sure. I love you guys.
You've had to put up with me for a number of years.
Oh, good Lord. Did I ever? Sorry. So if you look in the laser panel in LightBurn, there is right next to the frame button is another frame button that's also called frame, and it's just a circle instead of a square. We call that the rubber band frame. And what it does is it traces the outline that would result if you were to snap a rubber band around your design. That's the simplest way to describe it. The mathematical way to describe it is it traces what's called the convex hull of your design, but nobody knows what that means. So, but yes, if you hang on a second, we've got new documentation coming, and the new documentation actually shows a picture of this, so like shows you what it would look like. So I'm going to bring that up.
Does that mean if there's like a cavity between like two parts that are sticking out, say this pair of scissors, like that it would be like on the outside here? Because
yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, and that's why I say it looks like what would happen if you snapped a rubber band around your design. So it won't go into concavities like that. But if you have a circle or a triangle or a diagonal line or something like that, it will actually trace the diagonal shape, for example. So if you just took a rectangle and rotate it, like a long, thin rectangle, if you frame that, it'll be perfect. If you rotate it 45 degrees, now you normally get this big ass frame that doesn't really show you much. Whereas with the rubber band frame, it will actually perfectly trace the outline of that. So here I'm going to try to share my screen, and I've never used this tool before, so share.
It's in there somewhere.
All right, so hopefully you guys can see this.
Nope.
Okay, share my screen. Come on, you can do this. Try this again. Share that one. All right, can you see that?
Nope.
I got nothing. I don't know why it's doing this. It's not allowing me.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think, Brian, are you like on a different device than you started with?
Yeah.
I think that's why, because ever since you bailed, the presentation thing kind of
went away.
Just gone.
Yeah, that must be it. And I've logged in again twice, and I keep getting the blue screen. So I'm sticking to the phone for the duration.
You're trying to go too advanced.
We need to run that rubber band frame through the LightBurn laser control, not through the Ruida control.
It is.
Yeah, you can't do it on the laser itself because the laser has no idea what that means. LightBurn internally is figuring out what the outline of your design is, generates the movement commands for it, and sends them to the laser. And it can actually be kind of juddery if you are using it on really, really smooth curves, because the laser doesn't do what's called motion planning for the framing commands. It's basically just saying do a full start and a full stop for every line segment that's being sent. And with a frame, normally that's fine because it draws, like this, and that's it. Whereas if you say do a rubber band frame around a circle, that circle is made up of lots of tiny little segments, and so it's kind of going all the way around, and it will shudder a little bit. That's normal. There's not much I can do about it, but it's still incredibly useful. I've used it for doing patch shapes, for example. We did some cosplay for Halloween last year, and I made leather patches for outfits that we had, and among them, we were putting things on leather, and the shapes were odd, and I was trying to fit them on these small patches of leather that we had, and to make them fit meant kind of puzzle piecing things together onto scrap and odd cuts and stuff like that. And so the O-frame rubber band frame really came in handy.
Now, Gary, you're not talking about the frame deal when you're using the rotary, are you?
No, just on using the camera on odd shaped materials.
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't even have to use framing exactly if you're using the camera. It generally nails things. I just sent a link because I can't share my screen. I can very easily share you the link that I'm looking at, and that shows you the green outline of what you would frame if you were to use a square frame versus a rubber band frame.
Hey, Jason, I got a question for you. This is Robert Kofed. Is there a way to change the frame speed when you're using LightBurn?
Yes. The speed in the move window affects jogging and framing.
Oh, great. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, one caveat is that only affects the frame speed when you click the frame button in LightBurn. If you are at the controller and you press the frame button on the Ruida, it's using the speed on the machine itself. Whereas in LightBurn, when you click the frame button, it's using the speed in the move window in LightBurn.
Yeah, I noticed that there was, at least on my machine, there was a dramatic difference between the two speeds, whether you're framing it from the controller or framing it from LightBurn. And so
Yeah.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
You can change the speed on the Ruida, and it'll affect your frame too, Robert.
Yeah. Yeah. The speed button on the panel in the Ruida controls the framing speed when you're doing it from that controller. Like, so if you,
yeah, and that's the frame speed on the from the controller is fine. It's perfect. It's the frame speed from LightBurn that's painfully slow.
yeah, you may have that speed set low, but yeah, it's just the speed value in the move window. You change that and off you go.
Great, thank you.
There was also just a quick aside. There was a version where there was a bug with the frame speed on Ruidas. Just make sure you have the latest version.
Oh.
Because it was using like whatever the default in the code was, which was like 5.
I think it was 50. I think it was 50 millimeters a second. Yeah.
That's what. Yeah. So it was just painfully slow.
Yeah. We try really hard for that not to happen, but every once in a while things slip out.
That's long since been fixed, but it was like within the last few releases, there was one version that was out for a couple of weeks that had that bug. So,
do we have any more questions out there? I don't know if Marc made it back on. I've been kicking him off all night long. I'll have to reschedule him.
We have one question. A user, Heather Devery, is asking any tips or tricks for LightBurn. If you look at the link that I sent there that has the new docs, go back to the main page of it. It's got advanced topics and it's got a cool tips and usability tricks thing page. These are not nearly as fleshed out as I want them to be eventually, but we are in the process of writing new documentation, and I have a bunch of stuff fleshed out here. And Cal Trophy is getting microphone noise.
Sorry, I had a question. Sorry.
Sure.
No worries.
I was on another webinar for most of this, so I apologize if I asked a question that's been asked already. But there seems to be a lot of comments about the new update, and maybe some bugs or issues with that update. Is there resolution to that, or any feedback on that?
Are you thinking of anything specific, or is this a general statement?
Sort of a general statement. I can't remember some of the comments, but I mean, I could look in the Facebook group and pull them out there, but there just seems to be some bugs or some glitches with it.
So there's one thing that I know of, and that has been the tab feature. There have been a couple of people who've been confused by gaps in their design, not realizing that they've accidentally turned on tabs. That's the only thing that I'm aware of that's significant. And that is the newest feature. And that's unfortunately kind of the nature of development, is when we create something new, we test it as much as we can internally, and then we throw it out into the world. And, you know, when you throw it at 10,000 or 20,000 people, some of them inevitably break something in a way that you weren't expecting. And we try to correct that quickly. LightBurn also supports a lot of different platforms, and so it's worth paying attention to the platform that people are talking about when they say, "Hey, there's a bug." If somebody says, "Hey, I found a bug," make sure that they're not using a G-code device. Like if they have a little DIY hobby level laser and we screwed something up there, it likely won't affect you. And so there's some of that. There's every once in a while we'll have a problem on Linux or Mac OS, for example, that doesn't affect the Windows version. That happens as well. We had on, I want to say it was 9.1.5, it might have been 9.1.4. We used a newer version of the framework, the cross-platform framework that LightBurn is built on, to help us deploy on multiple operating systems. And the Mac version of that was less stable than we expected. And so there were a bunch of problems and performance issues with it. And so we reverted that. But that really only affected people on Mac OS. So you'll see posts where people are saying, hey, I'm having stability problems, or I'm having issues, or it's crashing a lot, or things like that, or whatever. But it may only affect a small section of users. And we haven't honestly had that much in the way of problems with this one. The 9.16 release, which is the most recent, was quite stable. And I think the only issues that we've had with it have been related to tabs and people just not realizing that they had them on.
Yeah, tabs has been an interesting feature, especially because we found later on there's a lot of people coming from the CNC mill world that think of tabs in a very different way than the way that we necessarily designed them. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve.
And I think there was a post or support about tabs and what that specifically is, right?
Probably. Adam did a video on how they work and how to use them. So for anybody who doesn't know, tabs are just gaps in your cut. So if you were doing, I assume everybody has seen the like dinosaur puzzles. Like you cut out flat pieces and make a 3D puzzle out of them. If you were going to cut out something like that and mail it to a customer, the ideal way to mail that would be by not removing it from the original wood and just let the customer, break a couple of small pieces, almost like the way that you used to get model kits when you were a kid.
Yeah, Brian's got one there. Is that even that looks like the exact one that I used as a demo?
I think it is, yeah.
Or maybe
I don't have any design skills.
Yeah. So if you had something like that, for example, and you were going to send it to a customer, the ideal way to do that would be to leave the design in the wood and then put another piece of wood or something, cardboard, whatever, on top and bottom and sandwich the whole thing together and pack it all up so that your pieces didn't move. The easiest way to do that is to add tabs to the design, and that is small gaps in the cuts that will not be cut so that the cutout parts don't release. And you make them small enough that just flexing the wood a tiny little bit breaks them off, and that's
usually like sub 1 millimeter in length, if that, depending upon the thickness.
Yeah, we found like a quarter of a millimeter to half a millimeter is kind of the ideal size for a tab, depending on your beam size and the thickness of the wood and stuff like that. But yeah, they're super handy for that. But if you don't realize that they're on, then it's really disconcerting, and you produce a cut and it's like, why are all these gaps in everything? So
yeah, and this is the setting is per cut layer, whereas I think some people assume that it's like on the shape specifically, but it's actually if they're automatic tabs, they're not. They're just on everything on the cut layer. But there is a manual option, which then you wouldn't have that problem with, and you can set them specifically on the shape. But the settings for the tabs are per cut layer, so it applies to everything.
Jason, awesome. I use SignLab 99% of the time for my design. I've been using it 23, 24 years. Have you ever considered adding guides? I don't know if you're familiar with SignLab, but have you ever considered that?
I haven't used SignLab. What most people say when they are referring to guides are basically just lines that they're using to butt parts of the design up to or snap things to. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Yes, we actually do have those already, and they are lines. Oh, Adam is sharing something with me?
No,
it's
okay.
Okay. So we have in LightBurn, snapping works to anything. So if you just draw a line, you've made yourself a guide. If you turn that line, or if you set that line on a layer that is not set to output, then it will not be sent to the machine, and you can use it to snap other stuff too. And you can grab shapes and drag them against those lines and along them and so on, and that all works.
Soon we'll have tool layers too.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to say next, is the tool layers. Yeah. Go ahead. You wrote it, so you can.
Yeah, we're also been working on implementing tool layers. We're kind of waiting until we have more things that use them until it's released. But basically, you can draw and design to do all the same things that you can with any other layer, but they don't have any settings and they will never output. So they're meant to just be markup for what you have on screen. And you could do things like that, have guides and whatnot. Because I have access to them in the dev version, I actually use those for something else I have where I have on a plotter that I have, there's an area where I actually will end up putting the paper, and I have that marked off as a tool layer for that. So I know where it is, but it's never going to try to draw that.
So is that where you would put your jigs?
Yeah, you could do that too. You could mark your jigs with the tool layer or with a guide layer. Right now, it would just be a layer that's set to not output, but eventually there'll be a tool layer that you can just have it as this is where my jig is.
Yeah, honestly, the only benefit at this point for the tool layers over just drawing a standard graphic is that the tool layer is guaranteed to never go to the machine. There are no cut settings. It will never be sent. So there's no way for you to mess that up. There's no way for you to accidentally include it in your design. And they don't take one of your layers. So if you have a design that's got a lot of layers on it, or you have all of your cutting layers set up with different cut settings that you use regularly, having the tool layers means that you don't have to use one of your existing layers. But otherwise, go ahead.
How will the tool layers affect the job origin if you're using current position or any of that?
They are considered when framing or positioning in the same way that anything else is. So you could use cut selected graphics and use the selection origin that way. And I'm still on the fence about that. I may actually, I think Adam and I are going to have a conversation about whether or not they should even be included when choosing framing and stuff, because I kind of feel like they probably shouldn't be included in that. But there's arguments for and against. Adam's use, for example, where he draws the frame around the item that he draws the frame around the page or the wood or whatever. That's useful for framing. If you have a piece of wood that's an exact size and you draw a shape like a rectangle that is that exact size, you know that frame is going to go or be the size of your material exactly.
Yeah. And I save a template file with that shape locked in it. So it cannot move unless I unlock it. It's always there, and then I can even center things to it.
Yeah. So it's handy to have them be included in the frame, but it can also be handy to have them not included in the frame. So I may make that a switch. We could even make that so that it was a switch somewhere that just says, don't include tool layers when framing, or do, because I think it comes down to a preference, and it might even come down to a per job preference.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because the way I'm looking at it, I would tool feature not to affect the origin. That's the quick way of not having to go down and select my shapes and toggle that on. So that would be cool.
And I'm thinking the exact opposite, because I like that outer buffer zone where I align my laser and my material. And then when you do a frame, it kind of scoots over to what you're actually engraving and just frames out the correct area.
Yeah.
So I can see the internal argument there.
Yeah, it's funny. The frame positioning is based on the entire content of the design, but what actually gets framed is only what's going to be sent. And I kind of went back and forth on how that should behave, but ultimately, when I was using my own laser, I more often wanted it to frame just the bit that was going to be cut, not the whole thing, because I wanted to see where is this going to go on my material, not just, do I have the outer boundary correct? So if you've never used, or if you've never seen it behave that way, that description probably makes no sense to you at all.
Well, it looks like it's about 8:06. Do we have anybody else that has a question before we wrap it up?
Hi, one more question.
Sure.
Is it this is probably a user error, but is it normal where when I start my machine, my laser head goes back to the previous job's origin instead of the home origin?
Yeah. It should go to home first, wherever your homing sensors are, and then it will go to whatever you have set as the machine origin or the user origin in the machine. That's normal.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a setting in the Ruida vendor settings to specify where the laser goes to when you are done a job. So you can have it after it's finished a job, it will just stay where it is. I think the setting is called no return for that one. You can tell it to go back to whatever origin you have set, and the origin is persistent, and that's why when you turn the machine on, it goes back to that origin. That's useful for people who do repeated jobs or use jigs, for example. If you have a jig set up on your machine and you power down for the day and you go back the next day and you power back on again, that origin is still going to be there and you're still going to be able to use it. So it is useful. And then you can tell the thing to return to the machine origin after every job. And that can be useful if you have large material sheets that you have to pull out and you want to be able to clear them out of the machine without having the laser head in the way. That can be a convenience thing.
Also, another useful thing that kind of goes with that is we now have the saved positions option in the move panel, which I use for jigs and stuff all the time as well. So like I know it's always going to be in that spot, and I just will have it as a saved position that you can move to.
Yeah, if you use current position for running jobs, or you can just use LightBurn to tell LightBurn go to this spot and then go over to the machine and click the origin button and it'll set that location.
Yeah. I as someone who's only ever used the crappy old version of the full spectrum software at the makerspace that I attend, I've never used LightBurn. All these features you're talking about makes me really excited to get my own laser in time and use LightBurn, because I'm like, damn, that would be handy to have safe positions instead of having to try to figure out where the hell I am every time.
Yeah. For jigs that you use over and over again, I usually just run them in what's called absolute coordinates, and that is, wherever it's laid out on the page of the laser on the page of the software is where it goes on the laser, period. So you don't have to recall a saved origin. You just draw the graphics where you want them to go, and they go there. And that's handy for that. There are people who have rotary jigs or things like that where absolute position doesn't work because the rotary itself, so you'd use the stored move coordinate to move the head to the right place, and then you unplug the axis or flip over to the rotary and position the rotary under where you have it placed, and so for that kind of thing it can be useful.
That's actually one of the things I have it set up for.
Oh.
Because I like 3D printed a little jig that I could set the rotary up against, so it's always in the same spot. So then I use the saved position to go back to that point, and then I can put the rotary in, and then it's good to go.
Yeah, I know of at least one user who actually he's got his rotary set up on, he drilled physical holes into the machine, and he has the rotary on 80/20 extrusion rails. So it's mounted to rails, and then there's little metal plates on the ends with mating holes, so that when the rotary goes into the machine, it just locks directly into the exact same place every time. So he always knows that the rotary is just going to be in that spot. And he does, I can't remember what it is. It might be baseball bats or something like that. So he's got a kind of a unique setup, and it's basically the only product he makes, except for a couple of other, custom things every so often, but that's his principal thing. And so for him, repeatability is really important. And
so, well, it's 10 after 8, and I want to thank Jason and Adam and Mark and everyone else who was on here. I know Mark got kicked off. We're going to put him back on another episode. And of course, all you guys are welcome to any episode you want. And I'm going to stop recording if I can figure out how to do it on my phone. And then, I mean, if you want me to leave this meet up, if you guys want to chat a minute, that's fine. But, if you have any other questions while I'm trying to figure that out, you got a shot at them real quick.
Hey, thank you so much for answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Helped me out a lot.
I'll have a quick question about Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll have
So
it on the YouTube channel probably tomorrow. So it's going to be a big file, so it'll take a little while to process. So
yeah.
anyway, but again, Jason, I appreciate it, man, and Adam, Mark. I don't know if you made it back on here, and I know Robert, all you guys. I can't see who's all on here now, but I appreciate everybody showing up for these, and hopefully we'll make them better every time. So.
Oh, this was
Robert's
great.
back.
Thanks, you guys.
I
Yeah,
guess
that's
we'll
pretty
get
good.
out. All right. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Oh.